Jason is signing the papers. It's a weekday afternoon in a quiet real estate office. Beige walls, framed photos of smiling families, a little bowl of pens that all say, "Congratulations." Jason is 32. He's a project manager. He makes about $105,000 a year. He feels proud. This is what progress is supposed to look like. The house costs $520,000. It's not a dream home, but it's a home, and that matters. He's been telling himself the same thing everyone tells themselves. Rent is throwing money away. This is an investment. Prices always go up. The number that made all of this feel okay wasn't $520,000. It was much smaller. It's only $3,100 a month. That's the sentence that turned this from terrifying into responsible, from risky into smart, from a stretch into a step forward. Jason walks out with a folder under his arm and the quiet relief of someone who finally got in. What he doesn't realize is that he didn't just buy a house. He locked himself into a very expensive story about how wealth is supposed to work. There is a script almost everyone in America grows up with. It shows up at family dinners, in group chats, on social media, in casual advice from people who sound confident. The script says this: renting is throwing money away. Buying is an investment. If you don't buy now, you'll be left behind. And once that idea gets into your head, everything starts to bend around it. Jason didn't wake up one day desperate to own drywall and a roof. He wanted to feel like he was moving forward, like he was doing what responsible adults do. Renting felt temporary. Buying felt permanent. Renting felt like stagnation. Buying felt like progress. So when someone tells him it's only $3,100 a month, it doesn't sound reckless. It sounds like a milestone. That's the lie. Not that owning a home is always bad, but that owning is automatically investing. My name is Joseph, and I spend way too much time running the numbers on the stories we tell ourselves about money. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The phrase, "rent is throwing money away," is one of the most expensive ideas most people will ever believe. It collapses a complex financial decision into a moral judgment. Good adults buy, losers rent. And once you accept that framing, you stop asking better questions. You don't ask what the interest costs. You don't ask what taxes and maintenance eat every year. You don't ask what that down payment could have become if it had been invested. You just ask one thing: can I make this work? And if the answer is yes, you call it smart. Jason thinks he just converted rent into equity. What he actually did is step into a much more complicated financial structure that most people never fully price out. I want to give this a name, because once you name a pattern, it stops feeling like a personal failure and starts looking like a system. I call this the forced buyer trap, and it works like this. You're told that renting is wasting money. You're told that buying is investing. You're told that if you don't buy now, you'll miss your chance. So you don't buy because the math is compelling. You buy because you feel forced. Forced by prices that keep rising. Forced by friends who already bought. Forced by the quiet fear that waiting means falling behind. The trap isn't homeownership itself. The trap is buying before the numbers make sense, just to escape the social and emotional pressure of renting. In the forced buyer trap, the house stops being a place to live. It becomes a badge of progress. And once that happens, you stop evaluating it like an investment and start defending it like an identity. In this video, we're going to slow this decision way down. We'll run the actual numbers on what Jason's house costs every year, not just the mortgage payment. We'll separate what builds wealth from what quietly destroys it. And we'll lay out a simple framework for when buying actually does make sense, and when renting is the smarter financial move. Because owning a home can be a great decision, but buying under pressure is usually not. Let's slow this down and run the numbers. Not the comforting version, the real version. Jason buys a $520,000 house. He puts 10% down. That's $52,000 up front. He finances the remaining $468,000 at about 6.8%. Now let's talk about the monthly number everyone focuses on. Mortgage, property taxes, insurance, HOA. All in, about $3,100 a month. That's the number that made this feel okay. But monthly payments are not costs. They are just the delivery mechanism. So let's convert this into something real. $3,100 a month times 12 months is $37,200 per year. Now, we need to separate what actually builds wealth from what does not. Because not every dollar in that payment does the same job. In the early years of a mortgage, the vast majority of your payment goes to interest, not principal. On a $468,000 loan at 6.8%, the first year interest alone is roughly $31,000. Let that sink in. Out of the $37,200 Jason pays in year one, about $31,000 is interest. That money does not build equity. It does not compound for him. It is gone. Now add property taxes. Depending on location, that's easily $6,000 to $8,000 a year. That's another unrecoverable cost. Insurance? Another $1,200 to $1,500 a year. HOA, let's say $200 a month, or $2,400 a year. And we haven't fixed a single thing yet. Now, let's be conservative with maintenance. A common rule of thumb is 1% of home value per year. On a $520,000 house, that's $5,200 annually. Some years it's less. Some years it's a roof, an HVAC, or plumbing, and it's much more. So let's stack just the unrecoverable costs in year one. Interest, approximately $31,000. Property tax, approximately $7,000. Insurance, approximately $1,300. HOA, approximately $2,400. Maintenance, approximately $5,200. That's roughly $46,000 in cash outflow in year one. Now, some of that is partially offset by principal paydown, but early in the loan, that number is small. In the first year, Jason might pay down $6,000 to $7,000 of principal. So if we net that out, we're still looking at roughly $20,000 plus per year in pure unrecoverable housing cost. This is the part that renting advocates usually ignore. They compare rent to the mortgage payment. That's the wrong comparison. The real comparison is rent versus unrecoverable ownership cost. So let's look at the alternative. Jason could rent a similar place for about $2,200 a month. That's $26,400 per year. Now compare the two. Renting costs him $26,400. Owning costs him about $20,000 a year in unrecoverable costs, plus a large amount of capital locked up. That's already closer than most people expect. But we're still not done, because we haven't talked about opportunity cost. Jason tied up $52,000 in a down payment. If that money were invested instead, earning a conservative 7%, over 10 years, it would grow to roughly $102,000. That's a $50,000 opportunity cost right there. Now let's look at the monthly difference. Renting costs $2,200. Owning costs $3,100. That's a $900 a month difference. If Jason invests that $900 instead of sending it into the house at 7% for 10 years, that becomes roughly $150,000. Now stack everything over a decade. Opportunity cost of down payment, approximately $50,000. Opportunity cost of monthly difference, approximately $150,000. That's approximately $200,000. Depending on market returns and maintenance surprises, that range easily stretches to $180,000 to $250,000. And that's before we even talk about price risk. Home prices do not always go up in a straight line. Even if prices rise modestly over 10 years, much of that gain is eaten by transaction costs when you sell, realtor fees, taxes, inflation. So when someone says, but it's an investment, the real question is, compared to what? Because the relevant comparison is not owning versus nothing. It's owning versus renting and investing the difference. And when you actually run that math, the picture changes very quickly. Jason didn't buy a house. He bought a highly leveraged, illiquid position that requires constant cash input and delivers uncertain returns. That doesn't make it evil, but it does make it risky. And it makes it very different from the simple story we're told about home ownership. This is why so many people feel house poor. They didn't miscalculate their income. They misunderstood the math. Because the cost of owning a home is not the payment. It's the interest, the taxes, the maintenance, and the money that could have been compounding somewhere else. This isn't a $3,100 a month problem. It's a six-figure opportunity cost problem. Run the numbers. Let that sink in. So if the math is this heavy, why does buying still feel like the smart move? Because this decision is powered far more by psychology than by spreadsheets. The first force is social proof. Buying a home is one of the strongest signals of adulthood in American culture. When your friends start buying, when coworkers talk about their equity, when family members ask, "So, when are you going to buy?" Renting starts to feel like falling behind. Not financially, socially. Jason didn't just see houses going up in price. He saw other people moving forward while he stayed in the same place. And that pressure is subtle but relentless. The second force is fear of being left behind. Housing has a unique psychological effect because it feels finite. There's only so much land, only so many houses, only so many chances. So when prices rise, your brain doesn't calmly evaluate affordability. It panics. It tells you, if you don't get in now, you never will. This turns waiting into a threat and patience into risk. The third force is ownership bias. We assign more value to things we own or are about to own than to things we don't. Once Jason imagines himself in the house, it stops being a financial asset and becomes his home. And once something is tied to identity, your brain will defend it aggressively. It will minimize costs. It will dismiss counter-arguments. It will say things like, "You can't put a price on stability," which sounds wise until you realize it's being used to avoid pricing stability at all. There's also a powerful progress illusion at work. Buying feels like building something. Renting feels like standing still. Even if the renter is quietly investing and compounding wealth in the background, it doesn't feel like progress in the same way. Progress that isn't visible doesn't register emotionally. A house is visible. A brokerage account is not. And finally, there's loss aversion. Once Jason buys, selling later at a loss, even if it's the rational choice, will feel like failure. So he's more likely to hold on, pour more money in, and tell himself it will work out eventually. This is how a financial decision becomes sticky. Not because it's optimal, but because backing out hurts more than staying in. This is why so many people say, "I know the math isn't great, but..." That "but" is where psychology takes over. Your brain wants certainty, belonging, and proof of progress. It does not want long-term optimization. And the housing market is perfectly designed to exploit that gap. Now, let's talk about the system that keeps this story alive. Because the idea that renting is throwing money away didn't appear by accident. It's extremely profitable. Start with the banks. Mortgage lenders make money on volume and duration. Bigger loans at higher rates over longer periods mean more interest collected over time. A buyer who stretches to get in the market is not a problem for the lender. They are the product. Then there's the real estate industry. Agents, brokers, platforms, and developers all get paid when transactions happen, not when decisions are optimal. No one earns a commission by telling you, "You should probably wait a few years and keep renting." That advice has no revenue stream. Local governments also benefit. Higher home prices mean higher property tax bases. New buyers often underestimate how fast those taxes rise after reassessments. And once you own, you can't opt out. Property tax is not optional. HOA fees are not optional. Insurance increases are not optional. This creates a very stable, very predictable cash flow for everyone except the homeowner. And notice how the messaging works. You rarely hear anyone say, "This might not be the best time for you to buy." Instead, the message is, "Real estate always goes up." You're building equity instead of paying someone else's mortgage. You're locking in your housing cost. Each of these statements contains a grain of truth, and that's what makes them effective. They don't have to be lies. They just have to leave out the parts that complicate the story. They leave out interest-heavy early payments. They leave out maintenance shocks. They leave out opportunity cost. They leave out the risk of needing to move sooner than planned. The system doesn't need to force you. It just needs to normalize the idea that buying is the default and renting is a failure. Once that belief is widespread, people pressure themselves. Banks approve. Agents encourage. Friends congratulate. Family celebrates. And the buyer absorbs all the risk. This is not a conspiracy. It's alignment. Everyone involved gets paid upfront or steadily over time. The person taking on decades of leverage is the only one who has to live with the long-term consequences. That's why the system keeps pushing people to buy early, buy big, and buy now. Because urgency is profitable, and patience is not. So how do you cut through all of this noise? You need a rule that replaces emotion with math. I call it the rent versus buy reality check, built on what's often referred to as the 5% rule. Here's the idea. When you buy a home, there are 3 major ongoing costs that never build equity. Property taxes, maintenance, the opportunity cost of your down payment. When you add those together, they average out to roughly 5% of the home's value per year. So here's the rule. Take the price of the home and multiply it by 5%. That number is the annual cost of owning before you even think about the mortgage payment. Let's apply it to Jason's house. $520,000 times 5% equals $26,000 per year. That's about $2,170 a month. This is the cost of ownership that behaves very much like rent. Now compare that to the actual rent for a similar place. If Jason can rent for around $2,200 a month, the comparison becomes much clearer. At that point, the decision is no longer about morality or adulthood. It's about numbers. Buying only starts to make financial sense when at least one of these conditions is true. 1. You plan to stay long enough for transaction costs to fade into the background. 2. The price-to-rent ratio is low enough that owning is clearly cheaper than renting. 3. You have surplus cash flow that doesn't disappear into interest and maintenance. If none of those are true, renting is not throwing money away. It's buying flexibility. It's buying liquidity. It's buying time. This framework doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you when the math is actually on your side. And that's the only moment buying stops being a forced decision and starts being a rational one. So what do you actually do with this? Not in theory, in real life. The goal here is not to convince everyone to rent forever. The goal is to stop buying houses for the wrong reasons, at the wrong time. Let's break this into 3 levels. Level 1, this week. First, you change the question you're asking. Stop asking, can I get approved? Can I afford the payment? Start asking, what is my unrecoverable annual cost? Write down, honestly, interest, property taxes, insurance, HOA, maintenance, opportunity cost of the down payment. If you don't know these numbers, you are not ready to buy. Second, detach your identity from the purchase. Owning a home does not make you disciplined. Renting does not make you irresponsible. Those are stories, not math. Level 2, this month. Run the rent versus buy comparison properly. Find the true market rent for a comparable place. Not a worse place. Not a smaller one. A real substitute. Then, compare that rent to your unrecoverable ownership cost, not the mortgage payment. If renting is cheaper, the question becomes, what do I do with the difference? That difference should be invested automatically. Not when there's money left over. Automatically. This is how renting turns into a wealth-building strategy instead of a waiting room. Level 3. The next 3 to 6 months. If you already bought and you feel stretched, the move is not panic. It's optionality. Build a larger cash buffer. Slow lifestyle upgrades. Prepare for maintenance shocks before they happen. If buying is still in your future, define clear buying criteria. Minimum time horizon, 7 to 10 years. Price to rent ratio that favors ownership. Payment that doesn't crowd out investing. Buying only makes sense when it adds stability instead of consuming it. Because the biggest mistake isn't buying a house. It's buying one that traps your cash flow, your flexibility, and your future decisions. The fix is patience, math, and optionality. Not pressure. Let's go back to Jason. In one timeline, he buys the house. He makes the $3,100 payments. He handles the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance surprises that always show up at the worst time. 10 years go by. He's paid hundreds of thousands of dollars into the system. He has some equity. He has less flexibility. And most of his financial energy has been consumed just keeping the structure standing. In the other timeline, Jason rents. He invests the difference. Month after month. Quietly, consistently. 10 years go by. He doesn't own a house, but he owns liquidity. He owns options. He owns an investment account that quietly grew instead of draining him. Same person, same income, same decade. Very different outcomes. This is the part the script never tells you. The trap doesn't look like a trap. It looks like progress. You don't lose wealth in one dramatic moment. You bleed it out through normal decisions. And the fix is not willpower. It's math and systems. Buying a home can be a great decision. Buying one because you feel forced almost never is. Before you sign anything, before you tell yourself, rent is throwing money away, slow down and run the numbers. If you want the rent versus buy calculator or the framework we used in this video, check the description. And if you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe.